All right, tonight is for the VBC Bible Institute. Tonight I'll be back to the subject of typology, which we started, I believe it was all the days merged together. I believe it was last Wednesday, right? I believe it was last Wednesday. So if you have your notes on typology, this would be great to have them. If you don't, well then, when I ask you questions, you won't know the answer. So no, here we go. Biblical typology, all right? Now, the reason we're looking at biblical typology for the VBC Bible Institute is because I just started a little while ago. I did a broadcast on Genesis chapter 15. So we're in that section in Genesis where it's filled with historical narratives. And there is a lot of people throughout church history. We could go back to origin, really, and look at his threefold method, but we won't do that in this particular discussion. I am doing a series called The Bible Has More Than One Level of Meaning for Theology Central. I've done 2 parts so far. I was going to do a 3rd part this evening. I didn't get to it. And that's going to connect to this. So there's a lot, and what we're doing with the Niagara Creed is connected to this. All this comes together. But the reason I'm doing it for the Bible Institute is we're right there looking at historical narratives, and there are those in church history who thinks those historical narratives, that even though it's a historical narrative with real people and real events, that those real people and real events actually, they picture something. They represent something other than what the words say. The words say it's a tree, but it's not really a tree. The words say it's a rock, but it's not really a rock. And then you have to use some principle made up by someone to figure out what they represent, and then it serves as a type. All right? Sometimes we can refer to this kind of method of interpretation as kind of an allegorical method because it's borrowing from some of that. Now just remember, though, this is very important. And I want to draw this distinction. Sometimes the allegorical method will look at a story, let's say the Adam and Eve in the garden, and say that's an allegory, and they will deny that they were real people in a real place. Everybody understand that? That's one form of the allegorical method. Some who hold to allegory will look at the garden and say, no, it was a real garden with real people, but it's an allegory of something else. Does that make sense? So there's 2 different perspectives. When you hear the first one, oh, it's not even real, you immediately will go, oh, you may immediately reject that. But are you rejecting it because of its hermeneutical method, or are you just rejecting it because you don't like the fact that they're rejecting the historical accuracy of the Bible? Well, you may want to reject it because they're rejecting the historical accuracy, but you got to go to the deeper issue of the hermeneutical method. Is the hermeneutical method correct? Because if all of a sudden the hermeneutical method becomes correct by simply saying, no, it's actual history, well, then that means you now have to adopt that method of hermeneutics throughout the entire Bible, which then can create all kinds of issue. And typically what happens is those who say, no, it's real history, all you end up focusing on is the allegory and the typology instead of the actual history. So we're gonna dig into this, and we'll see what you remember, all right? So first, basic definition. When we talk about biblical typology, what are we referring to? We're referring to typology as a method of biblical interpretation whereby an element found in the Old Testament is seen to prefigure one found in the New Testament. The initial one is called what? The type, and the fulfillment is designated as the antitype. Everybody remember that? So the initial one is called what? Type. The fulfillment? Antitype. Either type or antitype can be what? Person, thing, or event. But often the type is messianic and frequently related to the idea of what? Salvation. Keep that in mind. If you're listening to my series on the Bible Has More Than One Level of Meaning, that's his whole argument in what we're discussing in the textbook that I'm looking at from one of the schools I went to, is that every page of the Bible, every page, everything in the Bible points to salvation. And the Niagara Creed said that everything in the Bible points to Christ. All right? See how this works? Same kind of situation happens here. All right? Everybody remember all of that? All right, the use of biblical typology enjoyed greater popularity in previous centuries, although even now it is by no means ignored as a hermeneutic. Typical typological interpretation is specifically the interpretation of the Old Testament based on the fundamental theological unity of the two testaments, whereby something in the Old shadows or prefigures something in the New. Hence, what is interpreted in the Old is not foreign or peculiar or hidden, but arises naturally out of the text due to the relationship of the New Testaments. That's kind of their justification for it, all right? We talked about motivation for doing it. Everybody remember that? And then we talked about classification of types. What are the different types or classifications of the types? Do you remember this? Historical, legal, and prophetic. Everybody remember how these works? All right, I'll just go through them quickly. Historical. People in the Old Testament frequently are seen to be types of Christ. For instance, Moses, who led God's people out of slavery in Egypt and into the rest of the Promised Land, is clearly a type of God's Messiah. Now, I want you to stop right here. This is why this gets so ridiculous. All right? So, Moses there is a type of what? Christ. But today, when I was doing my lecture on the Bible has another level of meaning, they argued that Moses is a type of the law. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it can be both. Whenever you feel it can be both. See, but you see how once the typology starts, how do you control that? So I got a book. In fact, I don't know if the textbook is over there. I may have taken it home, or I may have placed it in my book bag. Let me look here. I have way too many books I carry around all the time. Yeah, I don't think I have it here. But I would, if you go back and listen to that. No, here it is right here. All right. Let me see if I can find the page. Because it's absolutely crazy how this works, and let's see if I can just read it. I didn't realize that we're getting ready to connect these two together, but I'll just give you an example. See here, let me find it. There's his rules that I was going to cover today. All right. Okay, let's see here. All right, I'll just read this, and I read this earlier today, but you'll see how this all fits together. All right, the account of Moses when he struck the rock and water came forth to satisfy the thirst of the Israelites. Everybody know that story? All right, can be understood if we see Moses as a figure of the law. The rock is a figure of Christ. The water is the gospel that flows from Christ. Moses, the law, struck the rock. That is, the law brought judgment on Christ. Therefore, water, the gospel of salvation, could flow from the rock, from Christ, to satisfy the thirst, the spiritual thirst of those who drank the water. All right? Now, that sounds good, right? If I preached that, you'd be like, whoa, amen. That's really good. And then we pick up now another book on typology, and what did we just learn? Moses is actually represents what? Christ. Well, wait a minute. Can he represent two different things? I guess whenever you want it to work. See, because him representing Christ doesn't work when he's striking the rock. That doesn't work now. So now now there we are. So you could argue that this one doesn't work, but you see, it just becomes. Do you see how subjective it becomes and arbitrary it becomes? That's the problem, and that's why I'm raising all of these issues with this form of interpretation. Not only because we're in Genesis and the Bible Institute, and this is where people start doing this stuff. This is where it starts going crazy. All right. A host of Old Testament characters can be seen in this manner. Adam, whose sin brought death to all. So we have Adam, who brings death to all. And then Jesus is the second Adam. Now the problem, that the Bible does speak of that, right? The Bible does speak of that. But listen, Protestants will go crazy with this kind of stuff. And then when they run into a Catholic who says Mary is the second Eve, and then all of a sudden Protestants are like, you can't do that. Why not? If you're going to go with a form of hermeneutic, you can't get mad when someone else uses it and you don't like the way they use it, right? You've got to figure out what's the means of interpreting the Bible. Is it the historical, grammatical, or do you go with this crazy typology? They offer another example. David, God's anointed, yet unrecognized king. So they're going to have them pointing to probably Christ. Esther, Elisha, they go on and on and on and on. And the rock, we went through a lot of these. All right, so there's the people. All right, those are the historical types. And then what are the legal types? Everybody remember the legal types? Okay. All right, legal types. Okay, I thought I finished these. Okay, legal types. Within the law of Moses, many sacrifices, offerings, and rituals were prescribed by God as the worship to be given by Israel. These sacrifices pointed forward in different ways to the one sacrifice to be offered on the cross for the sins of all God's people. So, basically, legal types are what? Anything found in the law of Moses, from sacrifices to offerings to rituals to whatever rules, they could all be used to point to Christ. So things within the law of Moses, just put it that way. Legal types. Now you would agree that some of those things we think do point to Christ. Now remember, what's the one time, I'm going to repeat this 1,000,000 times. When can you dogmatically say something points to Christ? When the New Testament says it. Other than that, what are you basing it off of? Your own thoughts and speculation. And that becomes a recipe for craziness. And again, when another group does it, you get like, oh wait, why is that cult over there saying they don't know how to interpret the Bible? You're using the same hermeneutical method. So how are you condemning them? You've got to figure out what leads to that. Like everyone condemned Harold Camping, my teacher who wrote the book that I was reading from. And everybody's like, he lost his mind. He's saying that we have to leave the corporate church because the corporate church is now under the control of Satan. And everybody condemned him. But wait a minute. Are you condemning the hermeneutic? You just don't like the way he applied the hermeneutic. What makes your application of the hermeneutic right and his application of the hermeneutic wrong? He went to Jeremiah and he talked about the Babylonian captivity of Israel, and he said the church is going to go into captivity under Satan, and when it does, you have to flee the corporate church or you end up taking the mark of the beast, which is symbolic for submitting to Satan. It's not an actual mark. Now people are like, that's crazy, that's insane. It's crazy and insane because you don't like what he said. But if you liked what he said, it'd be fine. It'd be wonderful. Well, you create the hermeneutic, and then you get mad when someone doesn't do it the way you want. All right. So there's the legal types. Everybody understand the legal types? Basically things within the law of Moses. All right. What's prophetic types? Imagery occurs frequently in the prophets and other prophecies contained in Scripture. For instance, some believe Genesis 3:15 is what? A picture, a prophetic type pointing to Christ and salvation. Not everyone in history agrees with that, but some do. Now the issue is Genesis 3:15 referenced in the New Testament? Now I'm not going to make you figure that out right now, but I'm just saying, you see, that's the ultimate question you have to ask yourself, all right? And then you know this, for instance, the promise of Genesis 3:15 is cast in terms of the struggle between men and serpents, and yet it contains the gospel as the seed of the woman crushes the head of the serpent once and for all on the cross. It is for this reason that this verse is sometimes referred to as the first gospel or the proto-evangelium, as we've talked about before. All right. Now, I have here the history. I can go to 1600s, but I think we can even go before then. But I got a lot of dates here. I'm not going to go through all of that right now. All right. Then we get to the historical critical method. Yeah, we can. There's so many different directions we can go. I don't want to get into all of that right now. All right. I will read this. Typology represents a vital part of early Christian hermeneutics. right? Typology was a part of early church Christian hermeneutics. Right? Now, that, again, sometimes people want to argue, well, if something is early, it makes it right. That doesn't necessarily make it so, right? How quickly were people departing from the truth of Scripture in the Bible? Well, the apostles were still alive. So just because something is Gnosticism was pretty early, it doesn't make it right. Agreed? So I guess sometimes people are like, well, that's what they did first. Okay, well, what they did first doesn't always make it right, because there was a lot of things. I mean, how quickly was Paul having to say, guys, wolves are going to be rising up from within your own within the church. I mean, that's where the apostasy began. So just because something is early doesn't make it right. And again, why do you think the early church adopted it? Because within Judaism, they came from Judaism, and there was a whole school of typological, allegorical approach within Judaism. So. Yeah, and again, and what else did they had? They still didn't have what? They didn't have something written down. So that was. It's hard to develop a hermeneutic when you don't have something in written form, right? That you can hold on to. It's hard to develop a hermeneutic about how to interpret a written book when you don't have a completed written book. Does that make sense? So you got to give the church some time to work through all of those issues, right? You got to work through that. And then really, you can't even really start really, I mean, they couldn't even preach the way we preach, right? I can sit there and say, hey, look this up. Hey, look up the Greek word. Hey, look up the Hebrew. Hey, hey, Stephen, what does Genesis 5 say? Hey, Diane, what does Romans say? They couldn't do that. They couldn't do that at all. So, yes. Certain parts they hadn't even been written, or they didn't even have access to the manuscripts that they were written. They may not even know it existed. So you got to let that stuff play itself out. At some point, you got to go, okay, what's going on here? What's going on here? But I mean, even by the time of Augustine, he was kind of, what is going on here? Even he realized some of this was crazy. And we've read some of those commentaries back then, and they're insanity. All right, so we've got all of that. Any questions about any of that? All right, here we go. Now, in one of the schools I went to, we utilized a book called Explore the Book by J. Sidlow Baxter. In fact, this was the entire textbook for the entire Bible Institute. And I don't remember how many years the Institute was. This is all we did in that Institute, basically, was go through this book. All right? I don't know. I had been in the Institute, I don't know how many weeks. It was a couple of weeks, and I remember telling the students, wait a minute, I guarantee you that's coming from a book. That's coming from a book. And so I went, during lunch, I went down to, it was called Divine Truth Bookstore in Papillion, Nebraska, and I found the book. And so then I was like, I'll just read the book. I mean, and so I just had the book. So which then ended up leading me probably being a jerk in class, because I was like, it's right there on page 12. Right? Why didn't you just tell us the book? Right? Just why teach it? Just tell me the book. That drives me crazy. If I'm using a book, what do? Because I could go home and write these notes down, and I could come in here and say, look, I'm going to teach. I don't understand why pastors do that. It's just let you know where you're getting it from, right? But here we go. We're going to be utilizing this, and we're going to dig into this, and hopefully you got your thinking caps on. Are you ready? All right. This is what, in the book it says, the book of Genesis, part 3. And I mean, it just jumps in. It doesn't even there's no discussion in this book about, is this the correct way? It is assumed this is the way. Not quoting from The Mandalorian, but yeah, this is the way. It is the way, right? Okay, this is the way you have to do this, all right? But, and so I'm going to read it as they approached it, but then I'll throw in my own, well, wait a minute, is this right or is this wrong? Does that make sense? Okay, here we go. So they have the book of Genesis, part 3, the type teaching of Genesis. The type teaching of Genesis. So what are they saying? The typology within Genesis, as if it factual. That's the way it is. Now, when you're young and you're in a Bible institute, you're like, oh, Okay, so this is the way it is. This is the way it is. And at first you don't, wait a minute, why is it this way? And of course, we didn't do any history on typology. We didn't go back into church history. We didn't contrast typology with the historical grammatic. Of course, you don't do anything in Bible college like you're supposed to do. Like, I don't even know why you waste your time going sometimes. Oh yeah, you got to get that piece of paper, right? But, which is very frustrating, because that church would have argued that they held to the grammatical historical method, but then teach typology at the same time. And it's like, don't you realize typology will literally blow up the grammatical historical? But here we go. It is a fact. These are as soon as we, so they go the type teaching of Genesis, and then underneath that they have Old Testament types in general, right? So Old Testament types in general, and then they have these words. It is a fact that in no little degree the Old Testament scriptures are permeated by latent typical meanings. Instances of their typical content are cited again and again in the New Testament, the following being basically examples of this. So I'm going to give you, they give us persons, objects, and events. They're going to give us examples of persons, objects, and events. Now listen to, you may not catch this, but they're making a logical argument. Here's the logical argument, right? And it's almost like if I was doing this in a debate, this is the way. So if I was debating for typology, this is the way I would debate it. Well, Bobby, isn't there passages in the New Testament that references Old Testament passages basically as being a type? And you'd have to say, well, then how can you say the others aren't? That's the kind of argument they're making. So they're going to use the examples that seem obvious to make the argument, then everything is. Well, the only problem is, and I've stated it again, when the New Testament does it, whose commentary is that? That's God's commentary. When God doesn't tell me it's a type, then whose commentary is it? Fallible men. And we just saw tonight, we have one book that says Moses is a picture of Christ, and we have another book saying Moses is a picture. And I bet you I can find some other books that say Moses is a picture of something else, okay? So let's see where we go. What's the first one you think they're going to use? Go to Romans 5:14. Romans 5:14. Romans 5:14. I believe it's 5:14. Okay, look at it and tell me what Romans 5:14 is doing. All right, I'm not going to have you participate as always. Romans 5:14. If anybody listening online puts a question or anything on the screen, let me know, Seth. What's going on in Romans 5:14? What Old Testament person is mentioned? Okay, Adam. Okay, Adam is mentioned, and it says that he was what? A figure of him that was to come. Everybody see that? All right. So that implies that Adam was a picture of Christ in some way. He was a figure in some way, right? Okay. Now, the argument he's making, well, if that happens there, that's the first person. That's Adam. Then why would it be? Well, then the Catholic come along. Well, then why can't Eve be Mary? Or Mary be Eve? Right? So, but that's the argument. All right. Now, let's see what else he says. He's going to throw in another one. All right. So there's Adam, and this is the way they have it. Adam is a figure or type of him that was to come. Now, can we argue against that? No, we cannot. Why? We got a scriptural explanation. Now, my thing is, if God doesn't do that to other people mentioned, why doesn't he do that with everyone mentioned? Either God didn't intend it to be, or as my professor, the teacher in the other book I was looking at, they implied that it's because now he leaves it up to you to figure it out. But if he leaves it up us to figure it out, what are the rules that govern it? becomes a problem. Okay? Now, here's the next one that they're looking at. You ready? Go to the book of Hebrews. I believe chapter, I think that's 7. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 3. I'm almost positive it's Hebrews 7, 3. It's got to be Hebrews 7. Yeah, it has to be. Now that I'm thinking about it. Hebrews 7, 3. Someone's going to be mentioned there? Melchizedek. Melchizedek. Now where does Melchizedek show up first? Genesis 14. All right? Okay, everybody remember that? Now, what does Hebrews 7, 3 say about Melchizedek? Does it say something about made like unto? Made like unto the Son of God. Made like unto the Son of God. The other translations may state it differently, but the King James says made like unto the Son of God. So, there are persons, Adam and Melchizedek. The New Testament refers them in connection with Christ. They connect them with Christ. Agreed? Now, is there any argument there? No argument there. And so we can dive into those riches and try to pull that apart. So my issue is, though, what if they don't do that with someone? Are you free to do so? We'll continue on. All right. So there's persons. The next thing they want us to consider is objects. Objects. All right. They want us to look at 1 Corinthians 10:4. 1 Corinthians 10:4. What do you have there? Object, remember, now this is the objects. What's the object? Rock. What does the rock point to? Christ. See it? Now does that mean... Right? Yeah, the rock was Christ. Yeah, and we got to understand how we understand that, how we mean that, right? Now does that mean every rock in every tree? In every historical account? Some people say yes. Now you can do crazy things with that. Right? So I guess David is a picture of God the Father, and the rock was Christ to bring down the giant, which represents death, hell, and Satan. Right? You see how is that am I supposed to represent the rock in the sling as being... I thought David was a picture of Christ. You see you can go on forever. Every time a rock is mentioned. And I went to a school that did that. I mean, water was always like, the sea was usually a picture of hell, and then a rock was this, and it's like, oh man, you get a headache. Now, in some ways it's fun, but it's fun because it's just a free-for-all, and you're just making up anything you want. All right, so there's objects. Look at Hebrews... Well, the takeaway is you're having something picturing, something super important. You're having something picturing Christ. So you're supposed to be learning something about Christ. I can understand what you're supposedly learning from it. But the point is how do you know that's what it's really pointing to? Does it make sense? In other words, you're making the text say something that the words don't say. And if the words don't say it, well then that's what I want you to understand. If I can make every rock picture Christ, because one time it did, then the word rock no longer means rock. It means Christ. Then a tree doesn't really mean a tree. An ocean doesn't really mean an ocean. Well then at that point, why not just turn the whole Bible into one big parable, which is what my professor basically told us to do, and the whole Bible is a historical parable. Well then, not this book, the other book that I've been using for my the two-part series so far on the Bible has a different level of meaning. He says the whole Bible is a historical parable. The whole Bible is a parable. Well, once words don't have meaning, we saw that. Isn't that what happened? All of a sudden, Israel doesn't mean Israel. Israel doesn't mean Israel. Okay, well then why does creation mean creation? Why does a day mean a day? You say, well, no, that means that. Well, why do you hold to such a historical grammatical for that verse, and then that verse, you don't hold to the historical grammatical? You can't do that. You've got to choose which form of hermeneutics you're going to do. You've got to. You've got to be somewhat consistent here. All right, one more just to look at. Look at Hebrews. Hang on here. My iPad is going crazy here. This web page is garbage here. This web page that I have open is crazy. I think it's Hebrews 9. Hebrews 9 verses 8 through 9. Yeah. Hebrews 9 verses 8 through 9. Hebrews 9, 8 through 9. What do you find in Hebrews 9, 8 through 9? Okay, tabernacle is a figure, right? Figure, kind of a type of what? Does it say? A figure for what?
A figure for the time were offered both
An illustration of the time. Okay, we don't have to try to unpack the verse right now, but I'm saying it's a figure of something, right? It's a picture of something. It's a type of something, all right? Now, that's an object. So guess what? Well, so now basically they're going to claim every object in the entire Bible now can be served as a type. So we have people, we have objects. Agreed? Now, can we, this is what we can say and be fair. Are there times the Bible uses people as a type? Answer? Yes. Are there times the Bible uses objects as a type? Yes. Again, how do we know when this is occurring? The Bible tells us. Isn't that amazing how that works? Okay. All right. Now, what's next? We got persons, we got objects. What do you think next? Events. Events. Go to 1 Peter 3:21. 1 Peter 3:21. Tell me what you find there. 1 Peter 3:21. What event is being referred to in 1 Peter 3:21? Noah and the ark, or the flood, okay, depending on which thing. You got the event, so it'd be the flood, right? Because Noah would be a person, ark would be an object, right? So the flood, right? And what do they do with the flood? What does Peter do with the flood?
We're saved through the water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also.
All right. The King James, I think, uses some very specific language there. Does anybody have it? 1 Peter 3:21. Saved by water, the like figure, even baptism, doth now save us. Everybody see that? So now the event is connected to what? Baptism. Now how does that work? Leads to all kinds of questions, and some people take baptismal regeneration from that. All right? What do you do with that? But it's an event. Now, here's the question. That's an event that's specifically pointed to. Does that mean every single event in the entire Bible points to something? Here what do you have here that makes it so easy to work? Remember we talked about what two things do you have in typology? Type and antitype. Are both identified? And every situation we just looked at, are both identified? Yes. There you go. Now, you know why that fits the grammatic historical hermeneutic? Because the words are being explained by the text itself. You see how that protects you? How that keeps you from driving the car off the road into 14, oncoming trees? It makes sense. All right. Next, and you know what happens when people go crazy, right? If I remember correctly, y'all were in a Baptist church where someone was in Genesis said, in the beginning, God created light. Jesus Christ is light. I know we say, wow, but what makes that wrong? We say, well, because you can't do that. You can't. Your hermeneutic can do pretty much anything once you open that door, okay? Well, you can do crazy stuff, all right? You can just start going, you can go all kinds of directions. And you see this when you deal with people involved in cults. You're like, what are you doing? They don't have a hermeneutic, right? Hebrews 11, I believe. Hebrews 11:19. Hebrews 11:19. Hebrews 11:19. What do you find here? Hebrews 11:19. Hebrews 11:19. Right? Received him, Isaac, from the dead in a figure. Right? That the King James. In a figure, right? It's like a simile is pretty much, I think, what the Greek word there refers to. There we go. Now, what do you have? You have the actual.
He didn't kill him.
Right?
Yet he said he figured to
Raised him, right, from dead. But it was to picture something, right? It was to picture something. Does that make sense? So you have the two, you have the original event, and now you have some kind of an explanation of what it pictured and what it was to refer to. Now that's what they have right here in the center of the page. Just persons, objects, and events. Again, no explanation. They just jump in. And when you're first reading this, like if you're a new Christian, you're like, whoa! You're like, okay, how do I work this now? Right? And I remember when I first learned this stuff, I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to start back over with the entire Bible. And then I would sit there going like, okay, well, what does that represent? How do I make that represent what? What does that represent? And it's like, sometimes you start realizing the only time you could ever see what it represented is when someone told you what it represented. That should have been a clue, okay? That should have been a clue right there. Okay, now let's read. Underneath that, they have this paragraph. But besides these and other similar instances in which particular persons, objects, and events are said to be types or figures, there are passages in the New Testament which equally clearly assert the general presence of types and symbols in the Old Testament scriptures. And they say, note the following. All right, now, here's what they're going to argue. Those are specific examples, right? And now they're going to argue that the New Testament basically asserts this is the way to interpret the entire Old Testament. And here's the scriptures they're going to give to support this idea. Are you ready? Okay. Sure. 1 Corinthians 10:6. 1 Corinthians 10:6. 1 Corinthians 10:6. What do you find there? All right. Now guess where the debate's getting ready to start with this verse. What's the meaning of that word example? They make an argument that it means a specific thing. So guess what everybody needs to do? No, don't have an opinion. Look up the meaning of the word. Okay, look it up. Do I need to look it up in the Blue Letter app real quick? Yeah, I mean, look up the Greek. I mean, that's what we got to do, right? If we're going to find out the battle about the meaning of the word, let's go to New Testament, 1 Corinthians, that's chapter 10, right? Verse, is it 6? 6? All right. Examples. All right. And I believe the Greek word, tell me if I am right.
Strong's G, 5179, tupos. Tupos.
Tupos. The transliteration, guess what the transliteration is? Typos. All right. Now, what is the definition of the word? A die. By implication, a stamp or scar, by analogy, shape or statue, figuratively, style or resemblance, specially a sampler, type, model for imitation. Now that's a little different there, right? model for imitation, or instance for warning. Fashion, figure, form, manner, pattern, print. Now you got to be real careful there because there's a lot going on. You can borrow some of that and go, oh, see, it's a type, but it seems to be like it's a pattern, it's a figure which we are to possibly learn and follow from. What would be, we would use that as what word? Not a type. What's the King James used in 1 Corinthians 10? Bobby just said it? An example. And what do we learn in Bible study about examples? What kind of examples are there in the Bible? Examples to follow and examples to avoid, right? Now we all agree that the historical narratives give us examples, right? You're like, wait, why did he do this? Why did he do that? Now, that doesn't mean that's a big jump to go and know every person is a type that points to something else, right? That's the way that they are translating it. That's the way they are translating it. If you get to the outline of biblical usage, it's the mark of a stroke or blow print, a figure formed by a blow or impression of a figure or image of the image of God's form, the teaching which embodies the sum substance of a religion as represents to the mind manner of writing the contents in form of a letter. An example, in the technical sense, the pattern and conformity to which a thing must be made. And an ethical sense, then it has a pattern of warning, of ruinous events. An example to be imitated, a man of worthy of imitation. And a doctrinal sense of a type, person, thing, prefiguring a future messianic person or thing. There's a lot of different ways to go there, right? So what is that? So let's go back to 1 Corinthians 10:6. Now these things were our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Okay, now this is very important in Bible study. All right? When you have a word that has like 30 different ways of interpreting it or using it, that is always dangerous because guess what Christians love to do? They grab their tray at the Golden Corral buffet and they go through and they're like, oh, I like that. And then you run past and go, no, I like this. And then the kids run over to the fountain of chocolate going, oh, this is the only reason I'm here, right? Okay, that's how Christians act. So, can type refer to something prefiguring something? Clearly it can, right? Tupos, I should say. It can refer to that, yes. It can also just refer as something I'm just as an example to follow. So you know what? Let's not argue over a Greek word. Let's argue over the verse. What does the verse say? These things, whatever things he's referring to, and if you look at the context, what things is he referring to? What has he just talked about in the preceding verses? People dying, right? He's referring to a specific historical event, right? Specific people, who? Israelites. Specific event, they did something wrong, yes? A specific event, judgment occurred, yes? Then he says these things are what? 1 Corinthians 10:6. Are examples. Now, is he saying these are our examples to point to Christ or to point to prefigure something? No, look at the very verse. What does he say these types or these examples are there for? To teach us to do what? Not to be idolaters. So is it picturing something? No, it's serving as an example of what? Of what not to do. You can't go to make it say something the verse doesn't say. He liked the word, tupos. It means typos and transliterated into the English. Sometimes it can be used to refer to a type. This proves it. It does not. You know why he does nonsense like that? Because clearly it doesn't follow the grammatical historical approach to hermeneutics. Because the grammatical historical approach would go, wait a minute, what is the verse saying? They did this? That's an example of what not to do. Wow. I'm glad I had to go to Bible college to figure that nonsense out. That's pretty simple. Now let's see if he's got a better one. Okay, that one almost caused us problems, didn't it? Okay, all right. It would have if you were listening to a preacher, and let's say he was using a screen, and he put up there the transliterated typos. You're like, ooh, type. That would have sounded good, right? And then if he would have put the one meaning that it can prefigure the Messiah, you would have probably been convinced that it's right. Well, hopefully you wouldn't. You would have been looking it up going, wait a minute. Hey, this is used like 15 different ways. Right? What do you think the next one he's going to use? What do you think? 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 10, 11. He's going to double down. He's going to double down on the same chapter. 1 Corinthians 10, 11. What do you find in 1 Corinthians 10, 11?
All these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition upon whom the end of the world is come.
All right, all these things, what things is he referring to now? All this stuff that's happened to Israel. It's written for what?
Our
Examples. Now, wait a minute. Is this a type picturing something? No. Historical event served as an example for you to look at. And what's the purpose of it?
for our admonition.
Our admonition. To admonish us. What does it mean to admonish? Do you need to look up the definition of admonish? Go ahead and look up the definition of admonish if you need to. You don't have to look up the Greek word. Just look up the English word admonish. What does it mean? A mild rebuke. A warning. That's not a picture or a type. That's saying, hey, these guys did this. Now be warned by it. Don't do something. And I believe, if I am correct, that the Greek word there in 1 Corinthians 10:11 is I think it's the same Greek word. I think it's tupos. I think it's the same, or it's a different one. Is it tupoi?
No, is no thesis?
Oh, for example?
Yes. Is that
Oh.
what you're talking about?
Yeah, and 1 Corinthians 10:11. Okay, I thought it was, hang on, let me look at it.
Yeah, you better make that guy say it.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 10:11, ensamples. Okay. Let's see here.
55:9.
No, I have typos.
Really?
Yeah, I have typos, yeah.
For example?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I touched the wrong.
Okay, all right. I was like, okay, I'm like, I know that's the same Greek word. Okay, all right. Yeah, it's tupos. So it's the exact same Greek word. Exact same Greek word. So his attempts here have failed miserably. Right? Now we got one more to go. One more to go. And remember, this supposedly proves it. This supposedly proves it. Are you ready for the next one? All right. So everybody on the same page? All right. Hang on, let me open this up. Oh man, we're almost out of time. Oh. No, that's okay. That's okay. That's why we do this. That's why we do this. All right. Hebrews 10:1. Hebrews 10:1. Hey, you know why I'm spending the time doing this, right? If a book is making a claim about how I should interpret the Bible, and they say, here's the biblical proof and how I should interpret the Bible, and they're going to give you their best proof right there at the beginning, right?
Yes.
This has failed miserably, all right? So here's their last chance. This is the last one they give us. Are you ready? Hebrews 10:1. Tell me where it is. The law is a shadow of things to come. All right? What's the idea of a shadow? Does every translation say shadow? Every translation says shadow? Okay. Well, let's look up the word shadow. See what it means. Okay? Let's look up the word shadow. All right? Let's look up the word shadow, because this is supposed to be the one to prove it, right? It's going to give you the idea of an actual shadow. Okay. All Right? For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. All right? Now, I think the verse is going to give it away, kind of what's going on here, but that's okay. We have the word shadow. I think someone said skia, right? Skia. And it means shade. I think someone read it. Or a shadow, literally or figuratively. Darkness of error. Right? Everybody see that? It's outline, shade caused by the interception of light, an image cast by an object representing the form of that object, a sketch, outline. Everybody see that? All right, so according to this proves that the New Testament is saying everything in the Old Testament serves as a type. No, first of all, this identifies a specific thing. What is it? The law. Okay? And what does it say the law is demonstrating? It's a shadow, right? So here's the shadow, but there's something coming. The law is a shadow, but there's something else coming, right? The real reality is coming. What is it ultimately seeming to be pointing to there in that passage? Look at the whole verse. The sacrifices are part of what? The law. Did those sacrifices point to something? A sacrifice that was going to come and be done how many times? Once. Is that better than continual? Yes. Those sacrifices could not do what? Take away sin or make something perfect. This one is going to be able to do what? Take away sin, and through that sacrifice, I'm going to be declared perfect because of imputed righteousness. So, does that prove everything in the Old Testament is a type? No, that verse literally is giving us an example of something specific served a specific purpose. That's the best they got. That's the best they got. All right, now, here we go. All right, what time is it? No! We need, you know what? Lincoln and Levi said we need to do 2 hours tonight. They did. Because they're obviously more spiritual than all the adults, okay? But they probably didn't really understand what they were saying, but I could use it against them, all right? We got to stop right there. I'll just read this sentence. Still further, there are other chapters, passages, and verses in the New Testament which, while they do not actually assert... Now listen to this, okay? Listen to this. Are you ready for this? I love this. Still further, there are other chapters, passages, and verses in the New Testament, while they do not actually assert the fact of Old Testament typology, unmistakably imply it. And then they're going to give us some more examples. Well, they implied it because you already believe it's there. Your presupposition, if my presupposition is that, oh, Austin's over there taking notes, but I bet you she's writing stuff about me. And every time she writes something down, well, she's got to be writing something about me because my presupposition has already declared it to be so. So then the action I feel implies that because my presupposition is reading it into it. If you have a presupposition, you can make it say anything you want. Does that make sense? You can interpret the action based off your presupposition. So so let's go through this. All right? Let's conclude this way. According to this teaching in typology, there are persons, objects, and events that are used as types. Now, do we have any problems with the examples that were given? No, because why? The New Testament asserts that truth. Their implication is that means every object, every person, and every event. Can we all agree that would lead to some major chaos? Yes? I would agree. So to prove their point, let me again read how they did this. But besides those persons, objects, and events that we looked at, other similar instances in which particular persons, objects, and events are said to be types or figures. These are passages in the New Testament which equally clearly assert that general presence of types and symbols in the Old Testament scripture. Please note, they say those passages we looked at, they clearly assert the general presence of types and symbols in the Old Testament. And then we looked at 3. Did they generally, clearly assert that? No, they did not. What did they assert? That Israel was an example of to us and what not to do. And they were written to be an admonition to warn us. That's not a type the way he's explained a type. Agreed? Then he says the law was a shadow. Okay? That does not even prove the type the way he's arguing. That's proving that the law served a specific purpose. Foreshadowing something to come. And specifically, what aspect of the law does that passage says in Hebrews? The sacrificial law. So it even narrows it down. It even narrows it down. That doesn't prove your hermeneutic. Didn't even come close. That would lose in a second grade debate graded by kindergartners. Okay, I mean that's just ridiculous. It's foolish. But this is a textbook used in Bible colleges. Now, guess what? He's going to go all crazy on this typology, but guess what other method he's going to use throughout a good portion of it? The grammatical historical. And you can't see that it doesn't work. Okay, because it begins to undermine the very foundation. Now, a couple of things. Obviously, we looked at the Niagara Creed. The Niagara Creed makes the same kind of assertion, does it not? The difference is the Niagara Creed doesn't even try to prove it. It just makes the assertion every verse. What I did is I added 4 books to the Theology Central Book Club that are 4 books that claim Christ is in basically every page of the Old Testament. These they're smaller books. They're like $3 a piece for the Kindle, I think. I think like $4 or $5 for a paperback. But at some point I will pull those out and try to use some of them just to see what they do. And I just want you to see how crazy it can get. And again, the best example was tonight. We had a paper on typology saying Moses represents what? One said Christ and one said the law. Right. 2 different ones. And I stumbled upon that by accident. I wasn't even looking for that. Can you imagine the chaos we find when we start looking into it? I have a book in the library. It's a Bible handbook. And I had to have that handbook because when I went to that school that I talked about through camping, I would have to write papers. And guess what I would have to do? I'd have to use typology. Because he teaches there's 3 levels. And so I would have to write a paper showing the 3rd level of interpretation, which is everything points to salvation. There's times I'd be like, so I had to find books that would say, oh, here's the type. Oh, okay, there you go. Thank goodness. Okay, well, I couldn't bring myself to make up my own. Right? I could have, but I couldn't because I felt like, how can I do that? So again, it's easy for any person to go, well, I think that's a good form of interpretation. Okay, well then put it to work. Grab a notebook, go through the entire book of Genesis, and when you're done, come show me your finished work. And guess what? I'm going to declare you a heretic in about 5.2 seconds because the heretics will take Genesis and turn Jesus into who knows what. They'll go to Proverbs and do that. When it talks about wisdom, basically being created, oh, well, that's Jesus. Boom, boom. Jesus was created. And then those cults cannot do that. And then we turn around and go, every verse in the Bible is about Jesus. Well, why can't a verse that seems to speak of something being created not be about? Is Jesus light? You see the light? In the beginning, God said, let there be, implying that there wasn't before he said, let there be. So is Christ eternal? And we say, you can't do that. You can't. Why can't they? Every verse is about Jesus, right? No, it's not. It can't be. It doesn't work that way. So that's what I'm trying to show you. There's got to be some way to monitor that and to control it. Now, as I stated today, and I'll just state this for the anyone who didn't hear the stuff for today. Let me make it very clear. A good Bible student, though, a good Bible student, if they see a parallel, they will point that out and go, do you see that? Do you notice over here? That's interesting, right? Do you see in Ruth? Do you see the name of the children? Do you see this? Do you see that? That's interesting. It's one thing to point out, here's an interesting connection. That's far different than saying, that's how the passage should be interpreted. A good Bible student will notice when something's like, that's like when you read Genesis 14. Any good Bible student's like, where did Melchizedek come from? Guess what's interesting about Genesis 14? Well, Melchizedek shows up. No explanation of an origin. Like everyone else in Genesis up to that point, it's like so-and-so begat so-and-so, and no, Melchizedek just shows up. Okay? And then he's a king and he's a priest. Well, that's interesting. Okay? All right, you're going back to listen. Okay, and then and so he does that, and then the next thing you know, he's got oil and wine. What's going on? Now those are it's a good Bible student will acknowledge all of that. Now the good thing is though, when we get to the New Testament. Now, isn't that interesting? The passage seems to give you a clue, and then the New Testament comes along. There you go. Now, I'm not saying that happens every single time, and maybe if you see something interesting in the New Testament is silent, you should at least say what? We're going to proceed with caution here. Now, how have people throughout church history looked at it? Okay, has everyone agreed? Well, there's 37 interpretations. That would be another what? Red flag. Right? You see, you got to just be careful. Good Bible students will acknowledge when something is interesting in the text that doesn't make sense. Like when Jesus heals a guy by spitting in his face. What is that? So when do we have anytime someone spitting in someone's face in the Bible? Or spitting on his eyes, but you get the idea, okay? Right? Yeah, like using a spittle, right? You're like, okay, what's going on there? So when do we have people spitting anywhere in the Bible? What does that seem to represent? Now, I got no problem building that out and going, well, I don't know what's going on there, but it's different because Jesus never does that any other time. So that's something a good Bible student will notice, right? But then I've seen where I remember being in a Bible study for teenagers, and they were in Mark or Luke or one of those where Jesus gets in a boat and goes out into the water, and then they're like, well, the boat represents the church, and the water represents hell, and hell cannot get inside the boat. And you're like, what is that? What? Like, where do you get that from? You see how is it interesting it gets on a boat? Well, maybe. You could argue, you could probably look at the text and maybe come up with some reasons. Now, but you got to be careful if you can't look up something else and figure out what do boats represent. I don't know how the boat represents the church. Where did that come from? Do I have the church ever described as a boat? Described as a bride. Agreed? Okay? So, does that make sense? Right? So, so some people are like, man, you're basically trying to destroy what I typically do with the Bible. I'm not trying to destroy that. I'm trying to say, maybe we've done things that weren't right. All of us. Right? So we have to be challenged to try to fix it. But there's a little bit of typology, and you see how it works. All right? So we'll stop right there. And again, for those who want to check out those books, the Theology Central Book Club, you can join for free. It's easy. And then anytime I add books, you get a notification. So, all right. And then people listening, you can email me, newsif@yahoo.com, and I'll give you that information. All right, let's pray real quick before we end. Lord God, we come before you this evening. Lord, if there's one thing that we have to remember, is a very simple principle. It's your word. It's not our word. Our job is to try to understand what it means, and the best that we can do is to understand what it means by what it says. If we don't use that as the basis of understanding what it means, then we're using our own imagination. And as sinners who are fallible, I can't see how that ever will turn out in a way that will bring you glory and honor and lead us to truth. Give us a heart to study your Bible, but a heart to study it correctly. And we ask this in Jesus' name. And everyone said,